Montana Territory. Spring of 1879, the wind howled low through the Bitterroot Valley, sweeping dust around the wagon wheels as Caroline Granger dug her heels into the dirt, teeth clenched, wrists raw from the grip of the two men dragging her toward the back of the supply wagon. "I said let go of me," she shouted, twisting hard, her bonnet tearing loose and catching in the wind. Her long brown hair snapped free across her face. "Orders are orders," one of the men barked, hauling her up the wooden step. "You belong to Mr. Harwood now." "You signed the contract, girl." "I was tricked," her voice cracked. "That paper was for work, not marriage, and now you are his wife. Done deal." She kicked again, boots scraping loud against the wagon frame, then a voice cut through it all, firm and low like thunder rolling in before a storm. "Let her go." The men froze. Caroline's breath caught. The grip on her arms slackened just enough for her to twist and look. A man on horseback had come up from the trail, dust and sunlight behind him. He swung down in one smooth motion. His boots struck the ground hard. He wore a duster, worn at the cuffs, and beneath it, a navy shirt faded from too many days in the sun. His jaw was rough with stubble, his dark hair falling just to his collar, and his eyes sharp, steely blue locked right onto hers. "She rides with me now," he said. The silence that followed was sudden and deep. The taller of the two men stepped forward. "Who the hell are you?" The cowboy didn't blink. "Name's Boone Ellery." One of the men scoffed. "You Harwood's hired hand." "No, I am nobody's hand. I do not take orders from men like him." Caroline didn't know what she was seeing, rescue or madness, but her chest trembled with hope she didn't dare believe in. Boone took another step forward. "She said she was tricked. That's enough for me. She signed a contract." The man growled. "Then take it up with the courts." Boone's hand hovered near the revolver at his hip. "But if you try to put her on that wagon again, one of you will not walk away." The two men looked at each other, weighing their odds, and finally stepped back. Caroline's knees buckled as she stumbled down from the wagon bed. Boone caught her elbow. "Easy now." She stared up at him, her chest heaving. "Why did you do that?" "Because you looked like you needed someone to." Boone led her to his horse, a tall bay gelding with a white blaze, and helped her up behind the saddle. "You sure about this?" she asked, voice shaking. He nodded once. "I do not leave people behind." They rode out fast, Boone's hand steady on the reins, her arms tight around his waist. Behind them, the wagon grew small in the distance. They rode until dusk, stopping by the river under a stand of cottonwoods. Boone unsaddled the horse while Caroline sat on a fallen log, trying to calm the storm still whirling in her chest. He handed her a canteen. "Drink, you are shaking." She took it, hands brushing his. "Thank you," she whispered. Boone looked at her a long moment. "What is your name, Caroline?" "Caroline Granger." He gave a small nod. "You are safe now, Caroline." She looked down, eyes stinging. "I do not even know you." "You will," Boone said simply. They made camp together. Boone built the fire while Caroline unwrapped the biscuits and jerky from his saddlebag. She had not eaten since sunrise. They ate in silence, the fire crackling between them. "You were supposed to be a schoolteacher," Boone said after a while. "I was." She stared into the flames. "I came west from Ohio, answered an ad teaching in a small town, but it was all a lie. Harwood ran the postmaster too, told me I owed him for the train fare, the lodging. Then he said I was his now." Boone's jaw tightened. "You are not." She looked at him. "Why did you help me?" Boone shifted, his voice lower than before. "My sister was tricked the same way, years ago." "No one helped her." Caroline watched him. "What happened to her?" "She died, in Kansas. I found her grave too late." She swallowed hard, her voice soft. "I am sorry." Boone nodded. "Me too." The wind picked up again, colder now. Caroline rubbed her arms, and Boone stood, pulling his coat off and draping it around her shoulders. "You can sleep by the fire. I will stay close, but I will not bother you." She looked up at him, her voice almost a whisper. "Thank you for treating me kindly." Boone's gaze met hers. "You deserve that, and more." That night she curled beneath his coat, and for the first time in weeks her sleep came without fear clawing at her throat. When morning broke, Boone was already stoking the fire, coffee boiling in a tin pot. Caroline sat up slowly, brushing her hair back. Boone handed her a cup. "We have some miles ahead. There is a small ranch south toward Hamilton, belongs to a friend of mine. She and her husband will give us shelter for a while." Caroline took the cup. And then Boone met her gaze. And then we figure out what you want. She blinked. Why do you care what I want? He looked at her so steady it made her breath catch. Because it matters. They packed up camp and rode again, the sun rising over the hills. Boone talked little, but his presence beside her was solid, steady. She found herself watching him as they rode, how he scanned the horizon, how he kept the horse at a pace that let her rest. That afternoon, they stopped by a creek. Caroline knelt to wash her face, the cold water chasing away the dust. Boone crouched beside her, refilling the canteen. You said you had a sister, she said. He nodded. Did you two grow up out here? Not quite. We were born in Missouri, came west after the war. Our folks died from fever. I raised her as best I could. Caroline studied his face. That must have been hard. Boone shrugged. We did what we had to. She hesitated, then touched his arm. You are a good man. His eyes flicked to hers, something raw and quiet in them. I try to be. They rode again, the land rolling wide around them. Caroline's hands around his waist felt less like survival and more like something she wanted. As the sun dipped low, Boone pointed to a cluster of buildings nestled in a valley. That is the place. Caroline's heart beat faster. She gripped his coat tighter. Boone, he turned slightly in the saddle. I do not want to be sent away again. He reached back, his hand finding hers. You will not. They rode down toward the ranch together. The ranch sat low in a hollow where the grass grew thick and green, the house built of squared pine logs with a sod roof and a smokehouse out back. A fenced garden lay to the east, and 3 milk cows stood tethered near the barn. Boone rode up the slope and dismounted without a word, tying the gelding to a post. Caroline slid down carefully, her skirt stiff from dust and days of road grit, her legs unsteady from the ride. Boone led her toward the porch. A woman in her 40s stepped out, wiping her hands on her apron. Her sleeves were rolled to the elbows, her dark hair pinned tight under a kerchief. Her mouth flattened the moment she saw Caroline. You bring trouble, Boone? No, Annie. He turned slightly. This is Caroline Granger. She needs a place for a while. Annie looked her up and down, her gaze sharp. She's sick, running from the law. No, Caroline said before Boone could answer. I was nearly forced into something I didn't agree to. Boone stopped it. Annie's eyes narrowed. You ain't the first woman to come west looking for something better and find worse instead. I wasn't looking for anything, Caroline said. Just work, that was all. Annie studied her another moment before stepping aside. Come in then. You can sleep in the spare room, but you pull your weight. I don't keep idle hands under my roof. Caroline followed her in, the scent of soap and wood smoke thick in the warm air. Boone stayed on the porch, leaning against the post, arms crossed. Inside, Annie handed her a basin of water and a clean cloth. Wash first. Then we'll eat. The room was plain but tidy, a narrow cot in the corner, a small trunk at its foot. Caroline peeled off the heavy coat Boone had given her and dipped the cloth into the basin. Her hands trembled, though her face no longer felt so raw with fear. Later, over stew and cornbread, Boone said little. Annie asked questions without prying where Caroline had come from, whether she could sew or tend chickens. Caroline answered quietly, keeping her eyes on her plate until Annie nodded once and said, You'll do. Boone stood after supper and fetched his rifle from the corner, heading out into the dusk. Caroline rose too, unsure whether to follow. Annie caught her wrist lightly. Let him be. He don't talk much after dark. I wasn't going to ask him to. Annie's brow lifted. You care already, Caroline hesitated. I don't know him. That don't answer my question. Caroline looked out the window. Boone had stopped near the barn, the rifle slung lazy in one hand as he watched the sky. I'm just grateful, she said. Annie didn't press. Come morning, you'll help me with the butter churn. We'll need to trade in town soon. The days settled into rhythm. Caroline rose early, helped with milking, swept the floors, and learned to stretch dough thin over the table for pies. She didn't ask questions about Boone, and he didn't offer anything. But he was always nearby mending a broken gatepost, hauling water from the well, checking the fence lines. One evening, Caroline found him on the ridge behind the barn, seated on a rock with his hat resting beside him. The sun was bleeding out across the hills. Do you come here often? He nodded once. Best view on the land. She stepped closer, arms crossed. The wind tugged at her sleeves. I've been thinking about leaving, she said. Boone turned toward her. I don't want to be a burden. You're not. She studied his face. I've seen the way Annie looks at me. She thinks I'm here for you. She thinks a lot of things, Boone said quietly. Caroline sat down beside him. Are they true? Boone didn't answer right away. A hawk wheeled high above the trees, calling once before disappearing. I didn't bring you here for that, he said. I brought you here because you needed it, that's all. She looked down at her hands. I never had anyone stand up for me before. Not like that, he glanced at her. You shouldn't have had to need it. They sat in quiet for a while, the dusk gathering slow around them. When he stood, he offered her his hand, steady and sure. She took it. The next week passed with the quiet steadiness of early spring. Caroline mended shirts and helped Annie smoke venison strips. Boone disappeared for a day, returning with a fresh sack of flour and a new bridle. He handed Caroline a spool of blue thread without saying anything. She didn't ask how he'd known she'd been saving scraps for a dress. One afternoon, as she hung laundry near the creek, she caught Boone watching her from the fence. She didn't look away. Did your sister like blue? She asked. His eyes softened. She wore it almost every Sunday. Then I'll finish the dress, he nodded. The next morning, a wagon came up the trail, 2 men from town, one carrying a letter from the sheriff's office. Boone read it in silence, then passed it to Annie. Harwood's filed charges, she said. Claims you stole what's his. Caroline froze. Boone looked at her. We'll go tomorrow. You and me? Go where? To Hamilton. Clear your name. She stepped toward him. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do, Annie crossed her arms. You ride with her into that town, you're saying something clear. Boone didn't flinch. I know. That night, Caroline packed a small satchel. Boone set his rifle by the door. Neither of them said what it meant. But when they turned in, Boone walked her to her room, then paused. Do you want to be free of him? Yes, he nodded. Then we ride at first light. She touched his arm. Whatever happens there. I want you to know I trust you. Boone looked at her, his voice rougher than usual. I'll see you through it, all the way. She stepped inside, closing the door with her heart thudding steady in her chest. The morning air pressed cold against Caroline's skin as she mounted behind Boone. The sun had only just cleared the ridgeline, casting long stripes of gold through the cottonwoods. She wore the plainest dress Annie owned and had braided her hair tight against the wind. Boone had wrapped a scarf around his neck, the same deep green as the pine hills ahead of them. They rode without talk, the hooves cutting clean through the frosted grass. From time to time, Boone glanced back to check her grip, but she didn't need steadying. Her hands were sure. The nerves that had once made her tremble now burned into something steadier, defiance maybe, or faith. By midday, the road curved down toward Hamilton. The town lay quiet but watching, like it could sense the shape of what was coming. The church steeple rose above the roofs, and a dog barked somewhere near the smithy. Boone dismounted first, tying the horse near the livery. Caroline stepped down on her own, nodding when he offered his hand but not taking it. You lead, she said. I'll follow. Boone looked at her, his brow drawn. You sure you want to walk into this? I've been hiding too long. I won't be made small again. They crossed the street together, boots thudding across the wooden boards outside the sheriff's office. Boone opened the door and stepped aside to let her pass first. Inside, the sheriff sat behind a desk, polishing the lens of his spectacles with a handkerchief. He looked up, squinting. Boone Ellery, didn't expect to see you. Boone nodded. We're here about the letter you sent. The sheriff's eyes moved to Caroline. Then that'd make you Miss Granger. Mrs. Harwood, by law, a voice said from the back room. Caroline stiffened as Harwood stepped into view, coat too fine for a man who lived by threats. His mouth curved, but it wasn't kindness. You came, girl. Didn't think you'd face me head on. I'm not here to face you, Caroline said. I'm here to end what never should have begun. The sheriff leaned back, arms crossed. Let's hear it then, all of it. Caroline stepped forward. I answered an ad for teaching. When I arrived, I was told I owed for my passage, for lodging, even for the ink on the contract. Then he said I'd signed to marry him. I never agreed to that. I never even saw the word marriage on the page. Harwood laughed low. You think that'll hold up? I've got your signature. Boone stepped beside her. A signature under false claims isn't binding, you know that. The sheriff frowned. Got any of the original letter, the one advertising the school? No, Caroline said. He took it from me the first night. Boone pulled a folded paper from his coat. But I've got this. Letter from the woman who runs the Hamilton schoolhouse. Says they never authorized any post. No open teacher positions. No one hired. The sheriff took the page, scanning it slow. His lips pressed together. Harwood's voice turned sharp. You think hearsay from a schoolmarm is enough to ruin a man's standing? Caroline stepped closer, her voice level. You ruined yourself the moment you tried to own someone. The sheriff stood. That'll do. Boone didn't move, but Caroline could feel the tension in his jaw. The sheriff folded the letter again and slid it into his desk. You can go, he said to her. You're not bound by anything now. Harwood's face darkened. She's lying. I'll wire Miss Loring in Helena to verify this, the sheriff said. But from where I'm sitting, looks like you tried to force a woman into something under false terms. I'd suggest you leave town quiet, Harwood. If you stay, I'll find reason to keep you here. Harwood's glare lingered too long on Caroline before he turned and stalked out, boots slamming the boards. Outside, the wind had shifted, warmer now, carrying the scent of river mud and pine sap. Boone untied the horse, but when he turned, Caroline wasn't behind him. She stood at the edge of the street, watching the courthouse bell swing slow in the tower. He came to her side. You did it, he said. She nodded. I didn't want to be saved. I wanted to be heard. You were. She looked at him, something quiet blooming in her eyes. You came with me anyway. I'd do it again. They didn't speak for a while after that, just rode back as the sun dipped westward, setting the valley in amber light. By the time the ranch came into view, Caroline's dress was streaked with trail dust, and Boone's scarf had slipped down to his collar. Annie met them at the porch, eyes flicking between them. All settled, Caroline nodded. It's over. Annie stepped aside. Supper's on. Hope you're hungry. That night after the meal, Boone stepped out to the back steps. Caroline followed, the air still warm against her cheeks. He didn't look at her when he spoke. You could stay here if you wanted. She stood beside him. And if I didn't, I'd ride east with you, or north. Or wherever you needed to go. Her voice came quiet. I don't want to go anywhere. Boone turned then. Say it plain, Caroline. She took a breath, grounding her words. I want to stay, not because I owe you, but because when I picture tomorrow, you're there. His eyes held steady. I've known loss. I've known silence, but I've never known someone like you. She stepped closer, her hand resting against his. Then let's start something we both chose. Boone brought her hand to his chest, just over his heartbeat. His voice was low, certain. Together, then. She leaned in, not rushed, not afraid. The kiss came quiet, like the wind rising over the fields at dusk. No fire, no fury, just steady warmth. Inside, Annie cleared the table, glancing once toward the back door. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. The lamplight spilled soft through the windows as Boone and Caroline sat side by side on the steps, the stars unfurling above them. The wagon was long behind them now. Ahead their life waited slow, hard-earned, and theirs. By late May, the snowmelt had turned the streams wild, and the valley between the ridge lines bloomed with balsam root. The scent from the lilacs Annie had planted years before drifted across the yard whenever the wind shifted. Caroline stood at the garden fence, a basket hooked over her arm, her fingers stained green from pulling early shoots of weedgrass. Boone had been gone since morning, driving cattle from the southern rise with Annie's husband, Tom. The quiet sat heavier than usual. She straightened when she heard hoofbeats, shielding her eyes. Boone rode in at a slow trot, his shirt damp at the shoulder and a trace of dried blood near his collarbone. Caroline met him before he'd swung fully down. You're hurt. He handed her the reins. Just a graze. Barbed wire caught me when the steer broke the fence. She tugged his sleeve back, inspecting the cut. That should be cleaned. Boone didn't argue. Inside, she boiled water and found a clean rag. He sat on a stool by the hearth, silent while she worked, his arm steady as stone beneath her grip. You should have called for help, she said. Tom had his hands full. Would have been worse if I hadn't blocked the steer. She pressed the rag against the wound, watching his jaw tighten. You always put yourself in front of trouble like that, only when someone's got to. She dipped the cloth again, her voice lower. You don't have to be the one bleeding every time something goes wrong. Boone looked at her then, his gaze searching. Would you rather I stood back and watched someone else take it? I'd rather you didn't think getting hurt was the only way to be useful. He held her eyes. That what you think I'm doing? Proving something? I think you don't know what to do with quiet days, she said. Boone didn't answer right away. Outside, the wind had picked up and the porch door creaked once against its hinges. He finally said, "Quiet's not something I ever had much of. Don't always know how to carry it." She wrung the rag out, hands slow. "You don't have to carry it alone." He looked down at his hands. "I'm learning." That evening, Boone stayed close to the porch, whittling at a piece of pine. Caroline joined him after supper, her hands tucked into the folds of her skirt. She watched the knife move steady through the wood, curls falling to the floorboards. "What are you making?" she asked. He glanced up. "Haven't decided, maybe a bird." She leaned against the post. "You ever carve before?" "Used to, when I was younger." "Something to do with my hands when I couldn't sleep." Caroline sat on the step beside him. "What kept you up?" "Same thing as now, I suppose. Things I couldn't fix." A gust rattled the window pane. Caroline looked out toward the hills, dusk settling like a slow breath. "Do you ever think about leaving?" she asked. Boone set the knife down. "You want to?" She shook her head. "I don't, but I used to. When I was still in Ohio, I thought going west would be the change I needed." I didn't know what kind of change I was asking for. Boone folded his hands over his knee. "The land doesn't give anything easy, but it gives honest." She turned to him. "Is that what this is?" He met her eyes. "It's the first thing in a long time that feels real." They sat without speaking for a while, the night deepening around them, the stars coming slow and sharp. The next morning brought a letter, delivered by a ranch boy on a bay pony. Annie took it at the gate and brought it inside. "It's for you," she said to Caroline, handing it over. Caroline opened it slowly, her hands steady but her breath caught. Boone watched her from across the table. "It's from my cousin in Minnesota," she said after reading. "He says his wife's been managing a schoolroom in a small town near the border. They need help. He offered me a position." Annie looked up from the bread dough. "You going?" Caroline didn't answer at first. She turned the letter over in her hands. "I don't know," she said. Boone stood and stepped outside without a word. Caroline followed after a minute, finding him by the barn, his hand resting on the fence rail. "You think I should take it?" she asked. He didn't turn. "If it's what you want." "I didn't say it was." Boone's voice was low. "You've got a place here." "That's all I know." Caroline stepped beside him, her voice quieter. "It's not the job I was thinking about. It's the idea of going back east, being that girl again, the one who thought she needed to run to find herself." He finally looked at her. "You aren't her anymore." "No," she said. "I'm not." Boone's brow furrowed. "Then what are you thinking?" She turned to face him fully. "I'm thinking I don't want to go anywhere that doesn't have you in it." His hand found hers, rough and warm. "Then stay." "I will," she whispered. He pulled her close, not rushed, not uncertain, just sure. There was no ceremony to it, no grand declarations, just the quiet certainty of two people who had come through fire and found each other on the other side. The wind shifted again, carrying the scent of rain from the far hills, and the first drops began to fall just as Boone pressed his forehead to hers. They stood there, unmoving, while the sky wept soft around them. The rain passed by morning, leaving the earth soft beneath the hooves and the air thick with the scent of damp pine and new clover. Caroline rose before Annie, tying her apron snug and stepping out into the yard with bare arms and damp curls still pinned from the night before. Boone was already by the woodpile, splitting kindling with the ease of someone long accustomed to repetition. She watched him a moment, the swing of his arms, the clean sound of the axe striking through the grain. "Thought you'd sleep in," he said without turning. There was light coming through the chimney stones. Couldn't stay still. He set down the axe and wiped his palms on his trousers. "You're restless." "I'm ready," she said. For something more lasting. Boone's gaze met hers. He didn't ask what she meant because he already knew. They spent the remainder of the morning repairing a sagging gatepost behind the house. Caroline dug the hole while Boone leveled the brace, and neither of them spoke much, but the silence was full of something warm and settled. When the work was done, Caroline washed her hands in the creek and sat beneath the cottonwood, twisting a blade of grass between her fingers. Boone joined her, his hat tilted back. "You ever think on what you want to build here?" She looked over at him. "A schoolroom one day, just a small one." "Not for pay, really, just for the children too far from town to get there regular." "That'd be good," he said. "Tom's sister's boys near reading age could use a hand." She leaned her head against the tree. And you, what do you want? He shrugged once. Land that holds, animals fed. A roof that doesn't leak come autumn. Caroline smiled, the kind that stayed. You want something else, Boone, he hesitated. To know I belong somewhere with someone, you do, with me. He turned toward her fully. Then marry me, she blinked, the words landing like the first frost, quiet, final, beautiful. You're sure, Boone's voice was steady. There's not a thing in this world I've been more sure of. She reached for his hand, fingers threading through his. Then yes. They told Annie after supper by lamplight. Annie didn't blink, just nodded once and said, about time, before handing Caroline a tin box of buttons and lace that had belonged to her grandmother. Boone rode to town the next day to speak with the circuit preacher, and by week's end, they stood beneath the cottonwood with Tom and Annie as witnesses. Caroline wore a pale dress Annie had sewn long ago and never used, and Boone had shaved clean, his collar pressed crisp. The preacher kept it simple, no sermon, just the vows spoken low and true. Boone's hand in her stayed warm the whole way through. Afterward, they didn't hold a feast or a dance. Just a quiet supper on the porch, wild honey on fresh bread, and the soft sound of crickets rising in the grass. Later, Caroline sat cross-legged on their narrow bed, brushing out her hair. Boone watched her from the doorway. You look like you belong here, he said. I do. He came to her then, slow and sure, and sat beside her. She leaned into his side, and he wrapped his arm around her, his thumb brushing the inside of her wrist. They didn't talk about what came next. It was already unfolding. That summer, Caroline began teaching 2 mornings a week in the old smokehouse, once it was cleared and swept. She taught Tom's nephew and a ranch hand's daughter who could already recite the Lord's Prayer, but didn't know her letters. Boone repaired the roof with scrap wood, and Annie donated a crate of slates. By autumn, Caroline had turned the garden rows twice and laid in jars of pickled beets and dried apples for winter. Boone finished fencing the north pasture. When they lay down at night, it was with tired limbs and full hearts. They never spoke of the wagon or the contract or the papers once used to claim her. Those things had long since lost their shape. On one morning in late October, Caroline stood on the porch, wrapped in a shawl Boone had traded 3 pelts for in town. She rested one hand on her belly, the other on the rail. The cottonwoods had turned, and the sky hung low and gray. Boone stepped up beside her, placing his palm over hers. Feels different, he said. It is. He leaned down and kissed her temple. We'll make a good life for them, she looked up at him. We already have. The wind picked up, rustling the dried husks in the corn rows beyond, but the house stood solid. The fence lines held, and inside the warmth waited. They built no grand house, held no riches. But every morning began at one another's side, and every evening ended in the same place with hands clasped, hearts steady, and love carried not in words, but in every action made to last.